Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Mark Lim. Namaskar. Coming up in the next 30 minutes. Prime Minister Narendra Modi highlights India's efforts to alleviate hunger and poverty at the G20 in Brazil. Also calls for addressing the challenges faced by the Global South countries. Sri Lanka gets a new cabinet, strengthening President Dissanayaka's mandate to give the country a fresh start. Dissanayaka to visit India soon, confirms his foreign minister. Reports say COP29 reaches a fragile consensus on climate finance. Countries also urged to take up this issue at the G20 Summit in Rio. And Europe is divided over US decision to allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles against Russia. Analysts believe it may be a little too late. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived at the venue of the G20 Leaders Summit in Brazil on Monday. The Prime Minister was welcomed by the Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. This is at the venue, which is the Museum of Modern Art in Rio de Janeiro. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also met the US President Joe Biden at the summit venue. Well, the Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva opened the summit of the Group of 20 major economies on Monday with the launch of a global alliance to combat poverty and hunger, which he called the result of political decisions. Lula said the devastating effects of climate change are to be seen all around the world, and he urged leaders to have the courage to act. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the G20 session on social inclusion and the fight against hunger and poverty in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. The main points of the Prime Minister's address are as follows. The Prime Minister congratulated President Lula for his successful G20 presidency. The people-centric decisions taken at G20 Summit in New Delhi were taken forward by Brazil. G20 members prioritize SDG goals, focus on inclusive development, women-led development, youth power, new wings to the hopes and aspirations of the Global South. One Earth, One Family, One Future remains relevant at this summit as in the last. In India, 250 million people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 10 years. Over 800 million people have been given food grains free of cost. About 550 million people are benefiting from the world's biggest health insurance scheme. About 60 million senior citizens over 70 years of age have got the benefit from free health insurance. Maintaining a focus on women-led development and social inclusion. 300 million women micro-entrepreneurs have been linked to banks and given access to credit. 40 million farmers have received benefits worth $20 billion. Assistance worth over $40 billion have been given to 110 million farmers. Institutional credit worth $300 billion has been given to farmers. India is not only ensuring food security but also focusing on nutrition through the midday meal scheme. Special attention has been paid to the nutritional needs of children. India is also contributing to global food security. Humanitarian assistance has been given to Malawi, Zambia, as well as Zimbabwe recently. The Prime Minister said the main reason for our success is on approach, back to basics and march to the future. and focused not only on natural farming, but we've also been focusing on new technologies. We're focused on sustainable agriculture, protection of the environment. The focus has also been on nutrition and food security by promoting Sri Anna, that's millets, and developed over 2,000 climate-resilient crop varieties. Started the Digital Agriculture Mission. India's digital public infrastructure enabled social and financial inclusion. India supports Brussels' initiative for a global alliance against hunger and poverty. Important steps also towards implementation of the Deccan high-level principles for food security. The countries of the Global South most adversely impacted by the food, fuel and fertilizer problems, and the discussions also can only be successful when, the Prime Minister said, we keep in mind the challenges and priorities of the Global South. India will reform institutions of global governance. The world's most powerful leaders have gathered in Rio de Janeiro for the G20 Leaders Summit, where discussions on climate, trade and global security will dominate the agenda. With high stakes, degrading climate and rising tensions, decisions taken here could shape the future of the world. Let's take a closer look at what's on the agenda as the summit has begun.
All eyes are now on Rio de Janeiro as the G20 Leaders Summit kicks off on Monday. Over the next 2 days, the leaders of the world's largest economies will meet to tackle critical issues from poverty alleviation and combating hunger to institutional reforms, aiming to shape the future of our planet. The G20 nations represent 85% of the global economy and are key contributors to multilateral development banks. Leaders will focus on themes like climate finance, trade, and international security. Decisions made here will have a ripple effect on billions of lives worldwide. Climate change remains a contentious topic at the summit. Diplomatic tensions flared over global warming, with sources indicating that G20 nations reached a fragile consensus on climate finance, a point that has eluded recent UN talks in Azerbaijan. As the COP29 summit in Baku works on mobilizing climate funding, G20 leaders in Rio hold the critical financial tools needed to address the crisis.
And I have come to Rio with a simple message. G20 leaders must lead. And G20 countries, by definition, have tremendous economic clout and they yield massive diplomatic leverage. They must use it to tackle key global problems.
On Saturday, UN climate chief called on G20 leaders to prioritize climate finance, urging them to increase grants for developing nations and advance reforms in multilateral development banks. Amidst these discussions, US policy under President-elect Donald Trump casts uncertainty over trade and security. While outgoing US President Joe Biden has approved Ukraine's use of long-range US missiles against Russia, President-elect Trump pledges major policy shifts, including potential talks to address the Ukraine conflict and new tariffs, signaling a high-stakes shift in global diplomacy. Concerns over a US China trade war are likely to fuel intense trade talks at the summit. As the G20 summit begins in Rio, leaders face mounting pressure to deliver solutions on climate, trade, and global security. Bureau Report, DD India.
Well, India has made a strong intervention at the UN Climate Summit in Baku, urging decisive action on climate change. Highlighting urgent priorities, India called for barrier-free technology transfer, equitable climate finance, stronger international cooperation and mutual trust. Tapas Bhattacharya has the details.
In a decisive intervention at the 2024 annual high-level ministerial roundtable on pre-2030 climate ambition, India has emphasized bold steps to combat climate change at COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. Representing India, Leena Nandan, Secretary of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, highlighted alarming facts from the 2024 NDC synthesis report. She warned that 86% of the global carbon budget for 2020-2030 is on track to be used up, underscoring the urgency for decisive action. India outlined a 4-point agenda to drive global climate action. First, it stressed the need for barrier-free technology transfer. calling for the removal of intellectual property restrictions on green innovations. Access to affordable, adaptable, and locally relevant technologies is critical for developing nations. Second, climate finance remains central. Developed nations must fulfill overdue commitments, ensuring equitable and accessible funding to support clean energy and disaster-resilient infrastructure in the global south. Third, India called for enhanced international cooperation to ensure cost-effective and scalable mitigation efforts. It cautioned against unilateral trade measures that unfairly burden developing nations. Finally, India highlighted the importance of mutual trust. Developed nations must lead with meaningful action, fostering trust to achieve climate ambitions by 2030. Despite challenges, India remains optimistic. With 195 parties submitting NDCs, global emissions are projected to peak before 2030. However, the success of this ambition hinges on robust financial resources, technology transfer, and capacity building. India's call to action at COP29 is clear. Climate solutions must be just, equitable, and collaborative. Tapas Bhattacharya's report for DD India.
Well, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, or CDRI, it's announced $8 million for funding for 12 projects across 17 small island developing states under its Infrastructure for Resilient Island States initiative. Amit Prothi, who is the Director General of CDRI, stated that small island developing states are at risk due to their location and size. Recognizing the urgent need for action, we are launching 12 new projects, is what he said, to make infrastructure more resilient and to protect the lives and livelihoods of people following the goals of the Antigua-Barbuda agenda for small island developing states. CDRI is dedicated to helping these nations build strong infrastructure through technical assistance, policy support, project development, funding, improving project management skills, and strengthening data systems. The 12 projects announced will benefit Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Belize, Comoros, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, Kiribati, the Maldives, Mauritius, St. Kitts and Nevis, Seychelles, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Timor-Leste, Tonga and Vanuatu. Let's take a look now at other stories from around the world. And Croatian volunteer divers, they participated in an underwater cleanup effort. This is in the Milna Bay on the island of Brač. And their aim is to address the growing environmental toll of tourism that has led to growing amounts of underwater waste. Farmers in France have resumed their protest by blocking a motorway. This is outside Paris, against the prospect of a trade agreement between the European Union and Latin American countries and Mercosur. Greenpeace activists dumped tornado debris outside the headquarters of Total Energies near Paris. They want oil and gas industries to be taxed to benefit environmental activists from climate disaster funds. Still to come here on DD India Live. A U.S. envoy is expected in Beirut in a bid to advance a ceasefire. India is projected to be the fastest growing economy among the G20 countries, with a 7% GDP growth rate expected for 2024.
Complex issues, hidden agendas, twists and turns, strategic games. We think all dots are linked. We just need to connect them. Join me every week as I connect the dots to unravel hidden designs in statecraft, mysteries, and decode issues that matter to you. Watch Connecting the Dots with me at these times on DD India. Well,
you're watching DD India Live. I'm Mark Lin. Updates now from West Asia. And a senior Lebanese official has confirmed on Monday that a U.S. envoy is set to visit Lebanon on Tuesday for discussions on a potential ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. The visit, led by the White House envoy Amos Hochstein, is expected to build on a U.S. ceasefire proposal submitted to Lebanon last week. However, the visit has not yet been officially confirmed by Washington. As far as Beirut is concerned, it is reportedly supportive of Washington's efforts to bring an end to the conflict, but the Lebanese government is seeking revisions to the proposal on how to monitor a potential truce. The U.S. decision to authorize long-range Ukrainian strikes could help Kiev defend a foothold in Russia's Kursk region so that it may have leverage in any war talks. But analysts feel that this little is a bit too late for change. To change the course of the war, that is. But the Kremlin has called this U.S. decision reckless. Russia has been warning the West that such an escalation would raise the risk of a confrontation with NATO. This report gives us the view from Europe. DD India's Rahul Upadhyay brings us the report.
As the Russia-Ukraine conflict nears its 1,000th day, both sides continue to engage in fierce military operations, while global diplomatic efforts intensify to address the escalating crisis. The prolonged war has become an increasingly complex and multifaceted battle with no end in sight. As military engagements continue, support for either sides is building up. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell has expressed hope that EU members could soon agree to allow Ukraine to use arms to strike inside Russia.
I've been saying once and again that Ukraine should be able to use the arm we provided to them in order to not only to stop the arrow, but also to be able to hit the Arcus. I continue believing this is what has to be done. I'm sure it will be discussed once again. I hope member states will agree on that, and if not, anyone will do whatever they believe is according with the need to support Ukraine.
Amidst shifting dynamics, German Foreign Minister has emphasized that there is no change in Western strategy.
That is why we are providing even more and more intensive support in the defense of peace in Ukraine, above all in air defense. And that is why the decision from the American side, which I would like to emphasize, is not a rethinking, but an intensification of what has already been provided by other partners. It is so important at this moment.
Meanwhile, in response to the US President Joe Biden's move to allow Ukraine to strike deep into Russia with long-range American missiles, Russian lawmaker Maria Butina denounced the decision and warned that it could lead to a third world war. Amidst the ongoing military action, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Yevgeny Balitsky, the Russian-installed governor of the Moscow-controlled Zaporizhzhia region in Ukraine. The meeting took place at the Kremlin just hours after the US announcement regarding the missile strikes.
If such a decision has been made and conveyed to the Kiev regime, then this means a qualitatively new round of the escalation of tension. This is also a qualitatively new situation from the standpoint of US involvement in this conflict.
The US move came soon after the Russian airstrikes on Sumy, a Ukrainian city close to the Russian border, where at least 11 people, including 2 children, were killed and 89 injured on Sunday. Another Russian missile attack on Monday killed 10 people and wounded 44 in Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odessa. Rahul Upadhyay's report for DD India.
Sri Lanka's newly appointed 21-member cabinet took oath on Monday before President Anura Kumara Dissanayake at the Presidential Secretariat in Colombo. Harini Amarasuriya and Vijita Herath have retained their portfolios as the country's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, respectively. Sri Lanka's Foreign Minister also said that the President is expected to travel to India in mid-December, during which he will have discussions with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Here's the report.
As Sri Lanka's newly appointed cabinet of ministers took oath on Monday at the presidential secretariat in Colombo, President Kumara Dasanaike retained the key defense and finance portfolios after sweeping the snap parliamentary elections last week. The leftist leader Dasanaike confirmed the interim cabinet ministers along with Prime Minister Harini Amarasuriya and Foreign Minister Vijit Herath, who all retained their respective portfolios. In addition, Harini Amarasuriya will also be the Minister of Education, Higher Education and Vocational Studies. Other key appointments include Bimal Rathanaike, who has been assigned the portfolio of Transport, Highways and Civil Aviation, while Dr. Nalinda Jayatissa has been given the charge of Health and Media. The new government will hold its first parliamentary sitting on Thursday to elect the Speaker of the House. Dasanaike is expected to present his key policy priorities to the newly appointed lawmakers.
The most important thing, this power comes with accountability. On one side, it is accountability to the people. On the other hand, it is being responsible to our movement. Therefore, whatever power that was given to us, whether in the constitution or by law, when we use this power, we must be responsible to the people and the movement.
Meanwhile, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has congratulated his Sri Lankan counterpart Vijita Herath on his reappointment. With Ahmed Muin Farooqi, Ayushi Bhatnagar for DD India.
Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund delegation led by the senior mission chief Peter Breuer met the Sri Lankan President Kumara Dasanaike and key ministers also of the newly formed government at the Presidential Secretariat on Monday. The leaders, they discussed the next steps in the IMF program. The Sri Lankan president urged the IMF to maintain a balanced approach that considers the hardships faced by the citizens. He assured that under his leadership, social spending allocations would be utilized effectively. The IMF team is in Sri Lanka to assess economic policies, programs on the ongoing reforms and the implementation of previous agreements with the IMF. Upon successful completion of the review, the global lender is expected, in fact, to release the next installment of the loan, which is going to be about $330 million to Sri Lanka. The International Crimes Tribunal in Bangladesh has ordered to submit reports within 1 month in 2 cases which have been filed against the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and 45 others for crimes against humanity on the charge of alleged genocide during the anti-discrimination student movement. The 3-member tribunal passed this order. Besides the tribunal, it ordered the investigation agency to update it about the absconding accused and has set December 17 for holding a hearing over this matter. The tribunal was constituted under the International Crimes Tribunal Act of 1973 of Bangladesh, and it is to provide for the detention, prosecution and punishment of persons responsible for committing genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes and other crimes under international law. India is projected to be the fastest growing economy among the G20 countries, with a 7% GDP growth rate expected for 2024. According to a post on X by MyGov, citing the World Economic Outlook for October 2024, India is followed by Indonesia in the second place with a 5% growth rate. China ranks third with a growth rate of 4.8%, and India's time-tested partner, Russia, is ranked fourth with a projected GDP growth rate of 3.6%, followed by the G20 Summit host, Brazil, in the fifth place. That's all we have in this edition of DD India Live, but let's know your thoughts on the news of the day. And for those of you on the go, you can get the latest news and updates from India and across the world on the DD India mobile app, which is available on iOS and Android platforms. Scan the QR code and download it now. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Mark Lin. From all of us here in Delhi, thank you very much for watching DD India Live. Namaskar.